think at a place like Cornell, also there's a lot of pressure and like sort of imposter syndrome, like in this sort of feeling that I have to have it perfect. And like a makerspace allows you to play and experiment and innovate, and you go, okay, that didn't work. Let me try it again. Like, and get used to that idea that it's not always going to work perfectly the first time. Part of learning is that sort of failure, trying again, and learning from it, and that it's not fatal.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language.
The Makerspace is a place for Cornell students, faculty, and staff to exercise their creativity and learn new crafts and skills. Emerging Literacies Librarian Camille Andrews gives us the scoop.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Today, Camille Andrews is in the studio with us.
Camille is an emerging literacies librarian, and we will talk about the Cornell Makerspace in Mann Library, the mannUfactory. What a cool name.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Camille.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for having me.
We are very excited to hear more about the mannUfactory, but before we jump into that, can you share with us a little bit more about who you are, what do you do at the library, what do you do at the Makerspace, any other experiences with language and culture maybe?
Absolutely, yeah. So I sort of came to the libraries by a circuitous route. I was a comparative literature major.
Oh, wow.
And my focus was actually Francophone, African, and Caribbean literature. So I did study abroad for like a year in Montpellier.
Oh, nice.
Really loved it.
Yeah.
And then was sort of casting about, what to do after graduation. And then I basically sort of said, you know what, maybe publishing is the way to go. But that ended up not being my path, and eventually that led me to libraries. But now what I do sort of was an outgrowth of my interest in literacies and learning.
Yeah.
And so my position as emerging literacies librarian is basically doing instruction and outreach for the mannUfactory.
Yeah.
Let's jump in. Tell us a little bit about the mannUfactory. What is it, and where can we find it, and what's available there?
Yeah. So the mannUfactory is in Mann Library on the Agquat. And it is, if you kind of come in the doors, you'll see it off to the right. And it is basically sort of a creative production space. So Makerspaces, if you don't know, they can sort of take a lot of different forms, but basically they're places where people can come together, play, innovate, experiment, tinker with things, with all kinds of technologies. Like every Makerspace sort of has its own, particular setup. But we, knowing that there are like a lot of different making spaces on campus of various, kinds, we sort of saw our space as being an introductory, welcoming space. So,
nice.
We said anyone can come. It doesn't matter what, like college, department, major, course, like faculty, staff, student, community member. We don't care. Like we want everybody to be able to come in.
Yep.
And then just experiment with things. So we're a learning space. There are places that I think are a little more high end. So, if you are looking for like particular services or things, they may be kind of more in that line. But we're interested in sort of getting people in who may not think of themselves as makers, and people who are doing a range of making. So everything from 3D printing, VR, sort of like higher tech things, to sewing. We've got hand tools. We have Legos. We have art supplies. So the whole range of making. So people from various disciplines can come together and like collaborate and experiment and learn new things. I think in a nutshell, that's sort of what we aim to be.
Who are the biggest users right now of the mannUfactory? Is it students? Is it faculty? Is it classes, like intact classes or projects?
We get a mix.
Okay.
So I think our largest group is undergrad students.
Yeah.
Since they're their largest group around.
Sure.
Right? But we still do get, a lot of like grad students and faculty from research labs who are like trying to make custom parts for their experiments.
Yeah.
We also get community members who come in. We get faculty doing courses.
Yeah.
And we actually can actually help create assignments.
Yeah.
And work with classes and love doing that. So we have a wide range of things that we do and sort of
wonderful.
people that we work with.
Have you noticed any language or culture classes or students, maybe international students, milling about in the space and utilizing the various tools?
Yes, yeah. So we definitely get international students coming in. And, in this sense, we're like not a sort of formal language learning place, but, they're, and this will get a little like hopefully not too educational, easy, but like Makerspaces were designed as sort of constructivist learning spaces where you learn by like doing things.
Yep.
Sure.
And so that is a way of also learning English as a second language.
Of course, yeah.
Collaborating with people on things and sort of learning that and practicing those communication skills in the space. We have done also things that are sort of in the line of like cultural, like intercultural communication. We worked with one of the communication classes where they had students at 2 Chinese universities actually do intro videos to their universities. And then this communication class, visual communication, they also did intros to Cornell. And then they switched.
Oh, cool.
So we put in the headsets that we have in the Makerspace. We put the Chinese students' videos. And what the Cornell students had to do was come in, watch those videos, and then say, here's what I think they were trying to communicate. And then here's what I got out of it.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating.
Yeah. That is very cool.
Yeah.
Why are makerspaces important for education, especially thinking about a large university like Cornell?
I think makerspaces are crucial. So, I mentioned that sort of constructivist learning.
Yeah.
So that hands-on, active, experiential learning. And this is the way that things are going. And I think a lot of times at a place, particularly like at a research university, things can get very abstract and theoretical. But makerspaces sort of force it down to the hands-on, and then give people that experiential, active learning that has been shown is like a great way to learn.
Well, I think it's nice too because it levels the playing field, right? I mean, you might be an expert as an instructor in one area, but then you come to the makerspace and I would not know how to sew something. I mean, my mother would be devastated hearing this, but
You'd be like, I have a PhD, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think especially sometimes I feel for instructors, it's so important to put yourself back into the shoe of the learner.
Absolutely, yeah. And it gives everybody that experience of like being able to play with something new. I think at a place like Cornell also there's a lot of pressure and like sort of imposter syndrome. And this sort of feeling that I have to have it perfect. And like a makerspace allows you to play and experiment and innovate. And you go, okay, that didn't work. Let me try it again. And get used to that idea that it's not always going to work perfectly the first time. Part of learning is that sort of failure, trying again, and learning from it, and that it's not fatal.
Exactly.
It will be fine. And just get in sort of that playful mindset. I think that giving students a place where, it's not like, you're shooting for the A, where, you're just trying to play with something and learn it is critical around here because it's a high stress place.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I think that really relates to language because you don't, language, it's nothing that you you sit down and study, right? You have to experiment with it. You have to practice it. You have to apply it.
Yes.
And I think that concept is exactly what's happening at the Makerspace.
Yes. And it can give you this like immersive experience without being there or before being there.
Yeah.
So we actually had somebody from the Southeast Asia program come and say, well, I'd like to, before they go off on their study abroad, be able to use like Google Earth or something, or like in VR, like, 360 videos on YouTube to get a sense of a place. I was actually also testing some VR apps that were actually fun. Like there was one called like Busu Learn Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And basically you could go in and like talk to people at this party.
Yeah.
And so you got like, sort of this surround sound experience. It could talk to these virtual people.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then get like some response back. Like, so it's a little interactive. And so it was like, I thought, a great way to sort of get that immersive experience like before you.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And then to practice in like a low stress environment.
And I can think of a lot of applications for language and culture classes. Just the example you gave us with the video, with, doing an introduction about your university. A lot of our teachers do telecollaborative projects, and there could certainly be little modules attached to that where the resources you have at the Makerspace could be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. And we have sort of a full suite of things. So we have not only the space where people can come and play with these things, the tools, but also the expertise.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like myself and my colleague Matt Ryan and Jimmy McKee, our Makerspace coordinator, we help teach people things like sort of intro to basic video production or intro to like podcasting, like
Maybe we should have taken that, Sam.
The thing where you screw up a bunch, but it's not fatal. That's been.
Oh yeah, exactly.
That's what I've done here.
And that's how we have all learned. Actually, like none of us were experts in any of this before we started it. Like we just sort of learned along the way, and then have started to teach, and that's a great way to learn yourself, like and to try stuff, and then see what happens.
And you do have button makers.
Yes.
I do have to point out the button makers. I'm a big fan of buttons.
Yep. Yeah, no, buttons are awesome. Like, and there's nothing like just being able to, like in, a couple of minutes, just be able to like create something.
Exactly.
You're like, hey.
Yeah. That is fun.
Yeah. And we have it for rent. Or like you basically check it out.
Yeah.
It's not no money exchanges hands.
Exactly.
But yeah. And I think the library has always been a place too where, if there are like technologies that you want to experiment with or things that, you want to play with that you don't have, like often we're the place where we have it. And then you can come check it out.
Yeah.
So video equipment, like the VR headsets, things like that. Those are all like things that we make available.
So where can people find out more about the Makerspace and the mannUfactory?
Yeah. So we have a website. So if you just Google Cornell Library Makerspace or go to makerspace.library.cornell.edu, you'll find our website, and that has the full listing of everything that we have. And also ways to contact us. So you can also, if you have any questions, email us at makerspace@cornell.edu. We'll get back to you. So
awesome. Well, I hope that we can come up with a couple of ideas for our language teaching colleagues to think about how they can incorporate the Makerspace into their teaching practices or encourage their students to integrate it into their learning and into projects, maybe.
Not to mention some excuses to come up and play ourselves.
Exactly, yes. Of course.
Absolutely, yeah. And we'd be happy to help think through those things. I should mention we're working on a grant project with the University of Texas at Arlington.
Okay.
And they are looking at maker competencies. Basically, like what are some of the things that you can learn from making projects? So, developing a project plan. So those sort of soft transferable skills through, learning particular technologies. And so we are helping some faculty work through some assignments and then test draft rubrics that they can use to sort of say, does this final making project meet those outcomes? And they have a website as well where they're posting some of these curricular ideas. So I was actually looking at it. They had something from an intro Spanish class.
Oh, cool.
Where the students had to basically do some sort of critical analysis of something in Spanish culture. And then they had to create some object that was sort of their argument about that aspect of Spanish culture or language, and then do a final presentation, as well as journal articles that were talking about their project plan and documentation. So there was sort of the literacy aspect in kind of all areas.
Yeah.
So
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, before we sign off, we would like to ask you to share with us your favorite word in a language you speak, a language you are interested in, a language you have learned, or just any random word that you like.
For me right now, probably because of a class that I'm working with, synesthesia is a word that is sort of springing top of mind because that sort of... being able to smell colors and so that sort of sensory experience, I think, and makes sense also for Makerspaces. So
yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking of language with us today, Camille.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
Next week, we are excited to introduce a new LRC team member.
John Graves is the new instructional designer and project manager here. Tune in to hear more about John and the plans we have for supporting language faculty and students.
Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.